Good evening. On World News tonight, US takeover. Trump says Venezuela will turn over 30 million to 50 million barrels of oil to US. Iran protest. At least 25 people have been killed in Iran during the first 9 days of protest. Pup rescue mission. Little puppy rescued by a police officer after being left in the trash compactor to die. Good evening. Thank you for joining World News Tonight on Derana News channel. I'm Pritika Svakumar, and we start with President Donald Trump saying Venezuela will be turning over 30 to 50 million barrels of sanctioned oil to the United States in the aftermath of the toppling of Nicolas Maduro, who was seized from his country by US forces over the weekend.
The United States and Venezuela have reached a deal that could see up to $2 billion worth of Venezuelan crude sent to U.S. ports. That's according to U.S. President Donald Trump on Tuesday. The agreement could redirect oil shipments away from China and ease pressure on Venezuela's oil sector, which has been crippled by sanctions in a U.S. export blockade imposed last month. Trump said Caracas would turn over 30 to 50 million barrels of sanctioned oil to be sold at market prices, with proceeds controlled by him as President of the United States. The move follows weeks of escalating pressure on Venezuela, capped by the weekend capture of President Nicolas Maduro by U.S. forces, a development Venezuelan officials have condemned as a kidnapping aimed at seizing the country's oil wealth. Millions of barrels of Venezuelan crude remain stuck on tankers and in storage, unable to move under the blockade. Trump said Energy Secretary Chris Wright will oversee the operation, with oil transferred directly from ships to U.S. ports. At present, Chevron controls all Venezuelan oil shipments to the U.S., exporting up to 150,000 barrels a day under a U.S. authorization. U.S. crude prices fell more than 1.5% following the announcement, as traders anticipated higher supplies. It remains unclear whether Venezuela will see any revenue from the sales, with sanctions leaving state oil firm PDVSA locked out of global banking. U.S. officials say increased Venezuelan oil flows would support refinery jobs and help stabilize fuel prices.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio told lawmakers that President Trump wants to acquire Greenland by purchasing it from Denmark and not via an invasion, according to reports, citing people familiar with the discussions.
Tonight, the White House revealing President Trump and his advisors are discussing a range of options for acquiring Greenland, adding that utilizing the U.S. military is always an option. But Secretary of State Marco Rubio tells lawmakers the administration is not eyeing an imminent invasion and that the goal is to buy the island from Denmark, according to the Wall Street Journal, citing people familiar with the discussions.
We'll worry about Greenland in about 2 months. Let's talk about Greenland in 20 days. Right now, Greenland is covered with Russian and Chinese ships all over the place. We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security, and Denmark is not going to be able to do it.
But Denmark and other European allies are strongly pushing back at President Trump's renewed comments about taking over the Danish territory, writing Greenland belongs to its people. Overnight, top White House aide Stephen Miller dismissed the need to use the military.
Nobody's going to fight the United States militarily over the future of Greenland.
It comes as the president rallied House Republicans ahead of the midterms, warning them if Democrats take back the House, they'll try to impeach him for a third time.
You got to win the midterms, because if we don't win the midterms, it's just going to be, they'll find a reason to impeach me. I'll get impeached.
At least 25 people have been killed in Iran during the first 9 days of protests that started in Tehran's Grand Bazaar over failing economy. More than 1,000 people have been arrested.
Video posted on social media on Tuesday showed clashes between protesters and Iranian security forces in Tehran's Grand Bazaar. Rights groups said at least 25 people have been killed in the country during the first 9 days of unrest. The protests began in the bazaar of Tehran over the plunging value of the currency and soaring inflation. Iran's Fars news agency reported the shopkeepers' demonstration continued on Tuesday in the bazaar, with about 150 people focusing on economic demands. The authorities have acknowledged the economic hardships, but accused networks linked to foreign powers of stoking the protests. On Tuesday, Iran's police chief vowed to, quote, deal with the last of these rioters. Hengal, a Kurdish Iranian rights group, put the death toll at 25, including 4 people under the age of 18. It said more than 1,000 had been arrested. Derana, a network of rights activists, said at least 29 had been killed, including 2 law enforcement agents, in addition to 1,203 arrests as of January 5th. Reuters has not been able to independently verify the numbers. Iranian authorities have not given a death toll for the protesters, but have said at least 2 members of the security services have died and more than a dozen have been injured. Video released on Sunday appeared to show protesters in the city of Malikshahi being fired on. The protests have spread to some outlying cities, but so far do not match the scale of unrest that swept the nation in 2022 and 2023. However, even though smaller, these protests have quickly expanded from an economic focus to broader frustrations, with some protesters chanting against the country's clerical rulers. President Masoud Pezeshkian has promised reforms to help stabilize the monetary and banking systems and protect purchasing power.
The president is in the Chinese city of Shanghai, where he will meet young entrepreneurs and visit a historical site that represents Korea's fight for independence during Japan's colonial rule, and then wrap the 4-day state visit to China.
The focus of the South Korean leader's final day in China is the economy and history. President Lee Jae-myung will attend the South Korea-China Venture and Startup Summit on Wednesday in Shanghai, known as China's economic and financial hub, to meet young entrepreneurs in content, healthcare, and energy sectors. Later in the day, he will visit the Provisional Government Building in Shanghai, one of several headquarters used by the Korean government in exile during Japanese colonial rule. His visit coincides with the 150th anniversary of the birth of Korean independence activist Kim Gu, as well as the centennial anniversary of the Shanghai Provisional Government. The visit also focuses on the history of the 2 countries fighting for independence and national sovereignty in the early 20th century, which was touched upon earlier at the Yi-Shi Summit.
Amid deepening global uncertainties, the 2 leaders agreed to contribute to regional peace based upon their common history of working together to restore national sovereignty.
Yi arrived in Shanghai on Tuesday, where he was hosted by the party secretary of Shanghai, Chen Jining, for dinner. The Korean president stressed the importance of a friendly relationship between the 2 countries, noting the need to address negative sentiment and hate speech targeting each other's countries.
The UK and France have signed a joint declaration pledging to deploy troops to Ukraine in the event of a peace deal to guarantee the nation's security.
The coalition of the willing has often been described as an ineffective diplomatic talking shop, but tonight in Paris they've finally made a step along the road to peace in Ukraine. Britain and France have signed a deal to put their forces into Ukraine if a ceasefire is agreed with Russia.
This declaration by the coalition of the willing marks the first time that operational convergence has been achieved among the 35 member states of the coalition, including Ukraine and the US, in building robust security guarantees.
I can say that following a ceasefire, the UK and France will establish military hubs across Ukraine and build protected facilities for weapons and military equipment to support Ukraine's defensive needs.
The United States is also guaranteed to act as a security backstop and come to Ukraine's defence if Russia attacked or invaded again. There have been many difficult moments between the 2 countries, but today all sides seemed at pains to complement each other.
We think we're largely finished with security protocols, which are important so that the people of Ukraine know that when this ends, it ends forever.
Next month, the war in Ukraine will enter its 5th year. Yesterday, a hospital in Kyiv was hit by a Russian missile. Fighting along the front line hasn't stopped, even in the freezing winter. Actual peace still seems a distant hope.
Good steps forward yes, 90%, but we are each day a little bit closer. It's still not enough to have a peace.
This was the first time all 27 leaders have gathered in person. One of those here was Mette Frederiksen, the Danish Prime Minister, who has had to listen to repeated threats from the White House over the past 24 hours about the future of Greenland. But inside there was clearly an effort to separate the two major geopolitical issues and keep this meeting focused on Ukraine. The Europeans are petrified of angering Trump and losing his support on Ukraine. Tonight, the Americans are holding more discussions with the Ukrainians. There is still no agreement on land and how much Ukraine might be prepared to compromise. Until that is resolved, there will be no peace.
Let's go in for a short commercial break. More world news coming right after this. Welcome back. Russia has deployed Navy assets to escort an oil tanker also being pursued by US forces across the Atlantic amidst the escalating tensions.
The ship, which currently isn't carrying anything, historically has transported Venezuelan crude oil and was thought to be between Scotland and Iceland. President Donald Trump said last month that he was ordering a blockade of sanctioned oil tankers entering and leaving Venezuela, a move the government there described as theft. Ahead of the U.S. seizure of the country's former leader Nicolás Maduro on Saturday, Trump repeatedly accused Venezuela's government of using ships to bring drugs to the U.S. The U.S. Coast Guard tried to board the Bella One last month in the Caribbean when it was believed to be heading towards Venezuela. It had a warrant to seize the ship, which was accused of breaking U.S. sanctions and shipping Iranian oil. It then dramatically changed course as well as its name to Marinera, reportedly reflagging from a Guyanese to Russian vessel. Its approach to Europe has coincided with the arrival of around 10 U.S. military transport aircraft as well as helicopters. 2 U.S. officials said that the American forces were planning to board the ship and that Washington preferred to seize it rather than sink it. The U.S. military's Southern Command mentioned that it remains ready to support U.S. government agency partners in standing against sanctioned vessels and actors transiting through this region. The U.S. officials suggested that America could mount an operation like one conducted last month when U.S. Marines and Special Operation Forces working with the Coast Guard seized the skipper, a large crude oil tanker flagged out of Guyana after the vessel left port in Venezuela. Ampatsidis added that changing to the Russian registry might cause diplomatic friction, but would not stop any U.S. enforcement action. The potential standoff over the oil tankers comes days after the U.S. shocked the world with the Maduro seizure from the capital Caracas. It bombarded targets in the city during the operation to extricate him and his wife on suspicion of weapon and drug offences.
Taoiseach of Ireland Michael Martin has voiced opposition to tariffs amid persistent global trade tensions, emphasizing that his country seeks stable trade and cultural relations with China.
Martin is on an official visit to China from January 4th till the 8th, 2026, the first visit by an Irish leader in 14 years. Speaking to the press in Beijing, the Irish head of government shared his views on the global trade situation and Ireland's growing cooperation with China. Ireland has reaffirmed its opposition to trade tariffs, warning they are ultimately damaging the global economy. Speaking on the current global trade climate, Irish leader Martin acknowledged rising tensions, saying there is no point in denying the challenges facing international trade. He stressed that the continued dialogue is essential, calling for broader frameworks of agreement rather than focusing on individual trade disputes, in order to build stable and long-term trading relationships. Martin also highlighted the strong cultural and educational links between Ireland and China, pointing to a shared literary tradition and long-standing partnerships between higher educational institutes, which he described as an important foundation for continued cooperation.
Japan said that China's ban on exports of dual-use items to the country was absolutely unacceptable and deeply regrettable as diplomatic dispute between Asia's top 2 economies ramped up.
Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Minoru Kihara said Wednesday that China's export ban on dual-use items was, quote, absolutely unacceptable and deeply regrettable. A dual-use item describes goods or software that can be used for both civilian and military purposes. The term often includes rare earth elements needed for making drones, computer chips, and other devices. Kihara declined to say which industries could be impacted, saying it remained unclear exactly what items would be targeted. China's ban was announced Tuesday and is its latest move in response to Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi's remarks on Taiwan. Late last year, she said a Chinese attack on the democratically governed island could pose an existential threat to Japan. Beijing, which claims Taiwan as its territory, demanded she retract the remarks, something she has refused to do. Meanwhile, Chinese media reported that Beijing is considering tightening reviews of rare earth export licenses to Japan more broadly. Analysts warn this could have far-reaching consequences for Japan's manufacturing sector, especially automakers. Despite efforts to diversify supplies since China last curbed rare earth exports in 2010, about 60% of Japan's imports still come from China. Economists estimate a 3-month disruption could cost Japanese businesses around $4.2 billion. For now, customs data shows no signs of decline, with Chinese rare earth exports to Japan at a 1-year high in November.
Uganda's government will be banning live broadcast of riots, unlawful processions and other violent incidents ahead of an election in which President Yoweri Museveni is seeking to extend his 40-year rule.
Uganda's government said on Monday it was banning live broadcasts of unauthorized protests and violent incidents. It comes ahead of the country's general elections as authorities detained hundreds of opposition supporters. President Yoweri Museveni is seeking to extend his 40-year rule in the January 15 vote. The 81-year-old faces a challenge by pop star turned politician Bobi Wine, who is just over half his age. In a statement, the Ministry of Information Communication and Technology said, quote, live broadcasting or streaming of riots, unlawful processions or violent incidents is prohibited as it can escalate tensions and spread panic. The authorities often describe anti-government protests as riots. A ministry official rejected rumors that it was shutting down the internet.
Claims suggesting otherwise are false claims.
But it has banned the spreading of any content it described as inciting, hateful or violent. More than 50 people were killed before the last election in 2021 as security forces cracked down on Wine's supporters. They had accused Museveni of stealing the election, which the president denied. Museveni is Africa's third longest ruling head of state. He came to power in 1986 after leading a 5-year rebellion. Critics and rights groups have long accused his government of torturing and intimidating opponents to maintain his grip on power, allegations he has denied. Rights group Amnesty International said on Monday, Ugandan authorities have launched what it called a brutal campaign of repression against Wine supporters in the run-up to the election. Spokespeople for the government and police did not immediately respond to requests for comment on the statement by Amnesty International.
At least 4 people have been killed and several others wounded after violence flared up again in the Syrian city of Aleppo, with government forces and the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces trading blame for the clashes.
At least 4 people were killed and several wounded in Aleppo on Tuesday, after violence resumed in the northern Syrian city. That's according to state media reports. Government forces in the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, traded blame for the clashes. State news agency SANA reported that 3 of the 4 casualties were civilians. The fighting comes as talks continue over a stalled plan to integrate the US-backed SDF into Syria's central government. That agreement was meant to be implemented by the end of 2025, but has seen little progress. The Kurdish group has been reluctant to surrender the autonomy it gained during years of war, which left it in control of oil resources and Islamic State prisons. Syria's defense ministry accused the SDF of escalating attacks on army positions and residential areas, a charge the group denied, blaming what it called indiscriminate shelling by forces aligned with Damascus. Both sides had agreed to de-escalate after clashes in late December. Authorities have suspended schools and flights to and from Aleppo as tensions remain high.
Time for a short break now. We'll be right back with more world news. Welcome back. A little puppy left to die in trash compactor was adopted by a police officer. Passers-by mentioned that they heard whimpering coming from the trash can and upon opening found this poor thing.
Who would do such a thing? This sweet pup was abandoned and left to die in, of all things, a trash compactor. But a passerby reported hearing whimpering coming from inside the trash can. Yep, the 18-year veteran of the Gardena Police Department named the pup Norm on the spot after Normandy Avenue, where the little guy was found. The year-old terrier mix was taken to the SPCA LA South Bay Adoption Center. 5 days later, there goes Sergeant Bierling checking in on Norm.
Hey, it's good to see you.
With its tail wagging, Norm gladly goes into the sergeant's arms. Then, something amazing happened. That's right, Sergeant Bierling is adopting Norm. We were there today as his daughters Lacey and Riley showered their new dog with love. Mom Marina is also thrilled with their new family member. But gotta say, the other family dog, Winnie, is, well, still adjusting. Here's to Norm, who defied the odds and has now found his forever home.
Massive search triggered when a grandmother and her grandkids got lost during a hike in Caesars Head State Park in South Carolina. They were able to call 911 on the one cell phone among them. Searchmen heard the family's dog Coco barking and the family was airlifted out.
This granny and her grandkids got lost during a hike, triggering a massive search and rescue operation.
I kept getting weaker and weaker.
Tonda Michelin, 14-year-old Melody, 11-year-old Dale, and a third grandchild went hiking in Caesars Head State Park in South Carolina. With them, a little dog named Coco. Making matters worse, a fog moved in, and it started to rain. Suddenly, Tonda says the trail simply petered out.
The river was on this side. The mountain up was on this side. We couldn't go anywhere.
I was like, oh my gosh, we're gonna die.
Someone on top of the mountain. Our father about to die. Please help us. We're scared.
They found sanctuary in a little cave and managed to catch some fitful sleep. That's when searcher Joey Oberman enters the story. He heard Coco barking.
This is the hero right here. His barking is what I heard. That's how I found you guys.
The family was airlifted out.
If she hadn't barked, he probably never would have found us.
And with that, we come to the end of today's edition of World News Tonight. With the hopes of seeing you again, I'm Pritika Sivakumar, and we'll leave you tonight with the visuals of France celebrating 2026 in style with the Paris Fireworks Show. Also, don't forget to send us your feedback through email at feedback.adncenglish@derana.lk or via WhatsApp at 076-805-7933. Thank you for watching World News Tonight on Other Derana News channel. Have a good night.